What's up, everyone? Thank you for tuning in tonight here at the Well. We appreciate you being so flexible with us. We know it was obviously a bummer that we weren't able to meet in person tonight for our college worship, but we are just doing what we think is necessary to make sure we're playing our part in trying to stop the spread of COVID-19. And with Thanksgiving coming up and the spike here in our area, we thought it was necessary to take these precautions. So thank you for understanding. But nonetheless, we want to get in God's Word tonight, and so thank you for watching this. I hope you will pay attention and study this with us. We've got an awesome text tonight. We're just going to work through a few verses, and I pray it's an encouragement to you in your life. And so recently we have been going through a study called Even Though, and we've been working through the book of Philippians, and we've been kind of walking alongside Paul, who is actually, at the time of writing this, he's in prison, he's in jail, and yet the theme of this book, the thing that he can't stop talking about, is joy, about what he's rejoicing in or what he's looking for, all of these things. And so we've been asking the question, how is it that Paul, in such seemingly terrible circumstances, can have so much joy? We've been trying to answer that question, and in light of that, find ways that we, even in the midst of a year like 2020, we can have joy ourselves. And so tonight we're going to be in chapter 4. We're on week number 7 of an 8-part series through the book of Philippians, and I've entitled the message tonight, For the People in the Back. For the people in the back. We're going to be in chapter 4, just the first 7 verses. I just want to ask you at home, have you ever heard this statement before? For the people in the back. I see it all over social media. A lot of times I see it in a meme form. And perhaps you've seen this before, where someone says, say it louder, or say it again for the person in the back, right? It's normally like coupled with some sort of clever statement that's supposed to kind of take a shot at someone in some way, whether it be politically or whatever it might be. And it always, I've noticed this, and maybe you've noticed as well, it always comes with a bit of sass. I've always noticed there's always a tone of sass whenever I see someone use this, and it's kind of hilarious. And so really the whole idea is this. You need to make sure everyone hears it, even if they're the people in the back, and even if you have to repeat it 1,000 times, right? The whole essence of it is say it again, right? So that way everybody knows what you said, right? And so I love it, man. The whole point, the phrase is essentially, it's worth repeating because everyone needs to hear it. Right? It's worth repeating because everyone needs to hear it. So you need to say it again for the people in the back. Well, tonight when we get into Philippians chapter 4, in a really strange, kind of humorous way, that's exactly what Paul is doing. This is exactly, he's saying things over and over again because he wants to make sure everybody hears it. And so, man, it's a fun passage. I can't wait to get into it. Let me just catch you up on what we've been doing, man. Last week, we looked at chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. And really, as a summary of our study here, you can see these are the things that we've been discussing over the past 7 weeks. Paul finds joy in all of these things, in spiritual faithfulness, and gospel proclamation, and ultimate deliverance, and humble unity, and sacrificial service, and godly friendship. And then last week, we talked about how Paul found joy just in knowing Jesus. And if you missed any of those, you can look back on them on our YouTube channel, check them out, make sure you catch up on that. But tonight, we're moving forward, and really, here's the theme for tonight. Here in the first couple of verses of chapter 4, Paul reveals to us that he finds joy in transcendent peace. Transcendent peace. And so we're actually, again, picking up in chapter 4. We kind of jumped over the second half of chapter 3. That's not because it's not good or because there's nothing good in it or useful. It's just simply because we are trying to highlight where does he talk about joy in a very explicit way and what's the source of it. So we're jumping in chapter 3, and what we find here is that Paul has just wrapped up this discussion about he's pressing towards the mark of knowing Jesus, of knowing him more. He hasn't attained it yet, but he's still working towards it, and he's looking towards the day when Jesus shows up, and he ultimately he ushers in our full redemption, and that's literally takes us up to chapter 4. And so let's read the first couple verses real quick, just to kind of get into it, to see what's going on. Verse number 1, Paul says this. Check it out with me. He says, "Therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved." I love this, man. His tone here is something different that we haven't always seen through the specific verses we've studied. It's very personal. It's very endearing, right? He is going out of his way to express his deep care for this church. He says that, hey, you're my dearly beloved brothers, right? You are dearly loved. He longs for them. He calls them his joy, right? There's the key word. He calls them his crown or his reward, right? What he boasts in. And I love it. And because of all this, because of his love for them, he instructs them to stand fast in the Lord. And then at the end he repeats it again as if they didn't hear it, that they are so loved. And so from the start tonight we find a different tone. But look at verse number 2. He says, I beseech Eodias, and I beseech I need to look up how to say it. It's Syntyche. I looked it up. I spent like an hour today figuring it out. It's called her name is Syntyche. I beseech Eodias and beseech Syntyche that they be of the same mind in the Lord. And so here's something kind of unique that we haven't seen yet. Paul is actually making specific remarks to actual people in the church of Philippi. It's very interesting that he does this. And I love just the context of it, because here's the truth. He's just telling them, hey, ladies, we know it's two ladies. You guys need to be of the same mind. And we don't know the context. We know that they were probably arguing or bickering in some way. Perhaps it was causing a rift. Obviously, it was big enough for Paul to hear about it, right? But he's just calling them out, and it's a big deal here. And here's what I love about it. Can you just imagine being these two ladies when the letter shows up from Paul, right? All the church gathers around and they're reading this letter, and they're talking about what Paul wrote, and they get to chapter 4 here, and they're like, man, he loves us so much, right? Paul's like, my dearly beloved brethren, I long for you, you're my joy, you're my reward. Everybody's kind of singing kumbaya, like, man, Paul loves us. And then all of a sudden, verse number 2, he's like, hey, ladies, right? He says, you guys you need to cut it out. Right? You need to be like-minded. Stop arguing. Stop bickering over this. I imagine that the room got pretty quiet, right? Everybody's kind of reading it, and they stop, and they kind of like look up at Eodias, right? And Syntyche, and they're like, right? I'm sure there was some lady that was like, you heard what Paul said, right? Say it again for the people in the back, that kind of thing. And I'm sure Syntyche was like, shut up, Karen, right? Something like that. I don't know what it is. But my point is, man, it had to be kind of an awkward moment because Paul's calling them out. He's getting really personal with this church. And then look at verse number 3. He says, and I entreat you also, true yoke fellow, what an interesting word there, or fellow laborer, right? Someone that works, that labors with me. Help those women which labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and with other my fellow laborers whose names are in the book of life. He takes one more moment to offer another personal note. He says, hey, I need you guys to help out, to look after the ladies that helped me in the gospel, that worked with me in the Great Commission. Take care of them, right? They also helped Clement and these other people. And he doesn't even list out their names. He says, even though I'm not listing them out now, their names are in the book of life. And so you say, Austin, what is all that to say? We're not going to jump too deeply into that. We want to get to this stuff following it. But we do gather from these first 3 verses that Paul is speaking very personally and very intimately with this group of believers. And so after he makes these few personal remarks, he jumps into some more general instruction that I think we really see his heart behind there in the first 3 verses. And so you're going to be blown away at this. But believe it or not, the instruction that he's about to give is centered around one thing, and that is joy, right? You probably expected that because here we are in a series all about joy. And so this is exactly, once again, it's centered around joy. And it's so very simple, but also very important tonight. And so here's kind of the way we're going to outline it. Paul's going to offer them some instruction on how to live the Christian life. But really, again, it's centered around joy. So I'm gonna make 4 observations tonight about what a joyful Christian has, or what his life looks like here from the passages. It won't take long as we work through this. First thing I want to point out is this. We see here in verse number 4 that a joyful Christian has this. They have a disposition of joy. Now, if you're paying attention still, which I hope you are, you're probably thinking, okay, Austin, you're a genius here, bud. Isn't that a bit redundant? Didn't you just say that a joyful Christian has joy? And to simply answer the question, it is yes, I did, and that redundancy is important. And here's why. Because Paul himself, that's his point. That's what he's trying to take away. He is overemphasizing this because it's that important. Check it out in verse number 4. He says this, rejoice in the Lord always. He says, and again I say, rejoice. Very famous passage, right? We like to say it around Thanksgiving, all this stuff. But I want you to imagine reading this for the first time, right? Literally, guys, this whole book is about joy. We're in chapter 4. It's not a very long book, but when he says this here in verse number 4, this is the 14th time in 3.5 chapters that he's talking about joy. Up at this point, you would think that he doesn't need to say this anymore, right? He's talked about joy. He's told them to rejoice in the Lord, right? Why is he still talking about it here? And I love that because it shows something so important. Because even though this is the 14th chapter, or not 14th, the 14th reference in the 4th chapter, we would think that by this time it'd be like, all right, Paul, move on. We don't need to hear that anymore. But that's exactly when he says, no, guys, pay attention. I'm still saying the same thing. Rejoice in the Lord. I love it, man. He stresses it even more. It's overemphasized, and I love it. And then I want to point out a few things about it, not just how it's emphasized, but also that word always, or the word always. And that's a very important word. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. And we need to take note of that. And this is the reason why I use the word disposition. I don't know if you know what disposition is. It's not a word we use all that often. But by definition, a disposition is this. It's a person's inherent qualities of mind and character, right? It is the quality of character, or maybe better understood as a character habit, right? For example, some people just have a naturally happy and sunny disposition. They wake up and there's birds singing, the sun is shining, and it's just great. Other people don't, right? They got to warm up a little bit. Their disposition is not so happy. And really, so when I say that we need to have a disposition of joy, what I mean is this, is Paul is instructing us to make joy our default. You know what I mean? It's the place we start from, not the place we work towards, right? Rejoice in the Lord always. He doesn't say when circumstances are good, when things are going how you want it, right? When your person wins the election, when you can meet in church, when this or that or whatever it is, right? We don't need something to go right in our life to rejoice in the Lord. We just rejoice in the Lord always. That's the point, right? We don't need perfect circumstances or the things to go our way. We rejoice. It is a constant outlook. It is our disposition. And that highlights one more thing before I move on. And that is this. Not only do we see an emphasis here and do we see the word always and the disposition, but it also brings out the fact that Paul is saying this as a command, which this is very important, okay? Which means this, that joy is a choice. Joy is a choice. I want you to notice that he is instructing his readers to do this. Right, most of the book, most of the past messages that we've looked at, right, he's talking about where he finds joy, and he's kind of talking about it in a loose way. Well, here in the past couple of times we've looked at the scriptures, he is no longer just talking about it in a passive, observational way. He's doing it as a command. He's saying, rejoice in the Lord. There's a major shift here, away from his joyful perspective and onto his joyful instruction. Meaning this, guys, all that to say, listen, very important, that rejoicing in the Lord is a choice. It is a choice. Sometimes it's easy to do, and sometimes it's not. But regardless, it is a choice. And I like to think about it this way. This really, the Lord spoke to me about this today, and it really brought some light to my own understanding of it. And the truth is this, guys, listen. Joy is as much of a discipline as it is an emotion. Take note of that. Joy is as much of a discipline as it is an emotion. We have to train ourselves in it. We have to make it a habit. We have to work at being joyful. So let me say this before we move on. For those of you that have been coming and been a part of the series the whole time, we've covered 7 weeks, today being the 7th, and one more week next week, talking about being joyful. We're almost done with it. And the truth is this, that for many of us, and I'm so grateful for you that you have been here, you've been engaged, you've been attentive, you've been faithful, you've taken notes, you've listened, you've been a part about it. But the problem is, you hear me week after week talk about having joy, and yet you still don't. Right? And yet you still don't. Here's the truth of it. So many of you guys have come and you listen and you pour into it, but then you go home and the only thing you think about are the issues that you're facing. You're consumed by your problems, by your worries, and it robs you of joy. Can I remind you tonight that there is something so much better than that? If you are a Christian, you always have a reason to rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. And that's a choice, not an accident, not a feeling. It's a perspective. It is a disposition. And so a joyful Christian has a disposition of joy. That's where he starts. That's the decision he makes. Secondly, and we'll move faster, a joyful Christian also has a testimony of moderation. I'm using some weird words, and that's only because Paul does so, and I'll explain it. But a joyful Christian has a testimony of moderation. Look at verse number 5. He says this, "Let your moderation be known unto all men. Be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand," right? Paul says this, "Let everyone see your moderation," right? And you're like, okay, that's cool, but I have no idea what that means. Me neither, right? I didn't know, because it's kind of a strange word. This word moderation is actually very interesting. Tonight, if you're reading from a different version, it might say something like gentleness, or it might say something like reasonableness, or tolerance, or patience. And the truth is that this is really actually all of those things kind of encompass the idea, the heart behind it. Truthfully, again, it's a combination, but realistically, scholars really agree that this word itself is one of the hardest words in the Greek language to translate, because there's nothing that really totally does it justice. And so the Greek word here for moderation is the word epikase. I know I'm butchering that, but it sounds fun just to try. Epikase. And it means mildness or gentleness. In fact, back in the day, the Greeks defined this word by this way. They said it meant this. It meant justice in something far better than justice. It's a little confusing, but that's the Greeks. They used it in circumstances, listen, where justice basically became unjust because of its strictness. So I think it's really best expressed as this: graciousness. Graciousness. It means that even though you have the right to enact justice, you extend grace. And let me give you an example of it. I was thinking about it today, and one example just came across my mind. I don't know if it's because I'm in the Christmas spirit or what, but I know some of you guys watching this are already listening to Christmas music. You already have your tree up. So I'm going to use the illustration anyways, because I couldn't get away from it. But that is of The Grinch. You guys, I hope you've seen that movie. If you haven't, as soon as you are done with this, go watch The Grinch. Okay, I promise it's worth it. The one with Jim Carrey, he's just incredible, right? Awesome, great, classic Christmas movie. But you know the story, right? The Grinch steals Christmas, right? That's pretty much the plot line. And so you've seen the end of the movie where everybody comes out in Whoville, right? And all the Christmas decorations are gone. All the presents are gone. Everything's gone, right? And they're all really, they're upset. They're sad. And then eventually they realize that Christmas was about more than that. Well, right about that time, down the mountain comes the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who, right? And he comes up with this giant bag of everything. All the decorations, all the gifts, all the food, everything, right? And I love it because he shows up and the mayor of the city, he's like, uh-oh, this is going to get good. And the Grinch shows up and he says, "I am the Grinch who stole Christmas." And then he looks at him and he says, "And I am so sorry," right? He says, "I am sorry." Well, the mayor said, he said it. He admitted to stealing Christmas. And he looked at the police officer and he said, "Lock him up, put him away," right? He just admitted to it. And I love what the police officer does. He says, "You're right, I did hear him. And I heard him say that he was sorry," right? And he said, "As far as I can tell, everything's here and he's not going away." And the Grinch was surprised. He's right. He's like, "You're not going to lock me up, right? Handcuffs, right? You're not going to put me in a chokehold or blind me with pepper spray," I think is what he says. And he says, no. He says, "Merry Christmas," right? And here's what I love about it, is this really, it really shows what Paul is talking about in a cool way, because according to the law, right, the Grinch had stolen everything. He was guilty. He was worthy of condemnation. He was worthy of the punishment, right? But because of the evidence in his life of change, the officer who was the upholder of the law said, "You know what? I'm going to meet it with grace. I'm going to meet it with gentleness and mildness and patience, right? That was his response to it. When in all reality, he had every right to lock him up and to be a jerk. That was the truth of it, right? In a loose way, it's really exactly what Jesus does in John chapter 8, I believe, where the woman caught in adultery is thrown in front of him. And they say, according to the law, she deserves to die. And Jesus said, he didn't argue that point. He said, yeah, that's what the law says. But then he defended her and he said, if you're without sin, you kill her. You throw the first stone. And they walked away. See, Jesus had every right to say you're guilty and you deserve punishment, but he met that with grace. And that's what Paul is saying. He says, let your moderation, your graciousness, your patience, let that be known to all men. Right? He extended, and that's the idea. We live graciously towards those, even if we are in a position to execute judgment. Right? We live in moderation. Why? Paul says, because the Lord is at hand, because the Lord is near. Right? He's coming soon, and when he shows up, he will extend all the judgment that is necessary. It's a powerful, powerful instruction. Listen, one that I think is very important for us today. Truthfully, because we live in a very tense, a very overly politicized, a very incredibly polarized society. And here's the truth of it. I find Christians acting less and less gracious. Less and less gracious. But to have a testimony of moderation is to willingly suspend our rights to a small degree in order to love and to show grace to someone else. Right? To temporarily suspend that. And the truth is, that's not what I see on Facebook. I see the exact opposite. And it's no wonder why we struggle with joy. No wonder. Because we're just so rude about it. The truth is, there is joy in extending grace. Now, take note. I'm not saying that we justify wickedness or we don't stand for what's right. But I'm talking about showing grace where the Lord allows it. There's joy in that. And that's a joy that most of us don't know anything about right now. But we really ought to learn something from. Right? A joyful Christian is a testimony of moderation. Thirdly, a joyful Christian has an antidote for anxiety. I love this, man. Read verse 4 with me. Nope, not verse 4. Verse number 6. It says, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. Here, Paul gives us two instructions here. The first one is this. He says, don't be anxious or careful about anything. That word careful, it doesn't mean in a responsible way, right? Throw all your cares to the side. No, he's talking about anxiety, when you overcare, when you worry, when you're uneasy or you're nervous about something. The truth is, if you're watching this, you don't need me to explain what anxiety feels like, right? You know exactly what it feels like. Right? That anxiety you feel over a job opportunity or a relationship that's on edge or an opportunity at school or maybe the news that the doctor's going to give you or recently maybe an election in our nation. We all know what it's like to feel anxiety. But I love what Paul says. He's very clear, very straightforward. He says, don't be anxious about anything. Right? Again, notice this is a command, meaning it's a choice, it's a discipline. Don't do it. But, and I know it's really easy to say, right? How in the world can we just not be anxious? Well, luckily, Paul gives us a substitution, right? He says, don't be anxious. Instead, lay it all before God. He says, right? He says, but in everything, in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And you see, this is the answer, man. You and I can be free of anxiety because we have direct access to God. We can go to Him with anything. And I love this, man. Did you notice when Paul said we ought to go to Him? Look at that. In verse number 6, he says, but in everything, let your requests be made known, right? He talks about, at least as far as how we do that, through prayer, right? Through supplication, which is to ask or request, right? And he also said with thanksgiving. Right? What a combination. By going to Him in prayer, by asking Him for what we need, by being grateful for all that He is, all that He's already done, we make our requests known to Him, and in that, we can let go of any anxiety. I don't know about you guys, but this is big for me because I'm a worrier. I almost said I'm a warrior, and that's a lie. I'm a worrier, right? And I know some of you guys are like that. I get anxious pretty easy over some small stuff, right? We all have moments like that. But do you realize that anxiety robs us of joy? Robs us of joy. Look at me tonight. Listen, there is a better way. You can trust Him. You can go to Him. I know some of you guys tonight, you're sitting at home, and I hope you're paying attention. And if you're to be honest with me, you would admit to being pretty worried, right? You're anxious again about a job or a relationship or something going on at home with your family or the COVID crisis or whatever it is. You are full of anxiety tonight. If you're to be honest, you would admit that you have a hard time being joyful because you've been so anxious. The good news tonight is, listen, guys, you can go to Him and lay it all there. You can tell Him your anxieties. You can tell Him your worries, your fears, your cares. He cares for them, right? You can lay them at His feet. And the issue is this, is the problem may not go away when we do this, but I promise that it will take that burden off of you. You can trust Him. He listens, He cares. And the truth is, we can rejoice because we don't have to be anxious. It's a choice. And then lastly, as I wrap this up, we also see that a joyful Christian has an unexplainable peace. And this is really what Paul's been working towards this whole time. Look at verse number 7. He says, "And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." I love this, man, because this verse is uniquely different than the first couple that we covered. Because this isn't an instruction, right? Everything else we've looked at is a command. All the first three of these principles are commands. This last one is not a command, it's a consequence of following these, right? It is a result. This peace isn't something that we have to muster up. It's something that He freely gives. And I want you to notice a few things about this peace. First thing, notice this, that it transcends our understanding. It passes all understanding. That's what it means. And this is really good news because that means this, that I don't have to know everything that God is doing. I don't have to understand His intricate design of my life and of our world and of everything that's going on. I don't have to understand everything in order to have peace. Peace is available regardless of whether or not I know what's happening. I can still have peace even when I don't know. Not only does it transcend our understanding, but it also guards our hearts. It doesn't just surpass our knowledge, but it keeps us. Meaning that nothing, no situation, no circumstance, no evil person, nothing can get at us. It's a peace that guards us. So let me just be honest as I finish this up. Truth is tonight, I don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of days. I don't know what's going to happen next year. I don't know what's going to happen with COVID. I don't know what's going to happen with our nation, with the election. I don't know what's going to happen in your life. I don't know what's going to happen with your jobs, with your relationships, with schooling. I don't know what's going to happen in any of that, right? We just don't know. But the good news is, listen, guys, you don't have to know to rejoice. You don't. You don't have to have everything under control and all in the palm of your hand in order to rejoice in the Lord. In fact, most often you're not, right? But we can give Him those anxieties, make our requests known, and He gives us peace that passes our understanding, right? He's given a peace that surpasses our understanding. So listen to me tonight. Listen, be content with that. That's one of the biggest challenges in life, is being content, right, with what God is doing, even if we don't understand it. So often we miss the peace that He offers because we are so consumed with understanding everything. But there's more than that tonight. So trust Him. Listen, guys. He is worth rejoicing in. Rejoice in the Lord. Live graciously towards others. Let go of your anxiety. Right? Go to Him with your request. And lastly, rest in His peace. There is reason tonight to rejoice in the Lord because we have transcending peace. Pray this has been an encouragement to you. Again, thank you guys for your flexibility. Thank you for watching this tonight. Feel free to let us know if you have any comments, any questions, anything like that. Man, we love you and we can't wait to see you. We hope you stay safe and stay healthy. And we look forward to being with you again.